Ladies and gentlemen, welcome into the third season of Krunch Time with Kruk. I'm surprised that we actually got called back for a third season, but we did. As always, join in the booth with Mad Max. Max, how you doing?
Kruk.
So we finally got out of that conference room at Maybe Fieldhouse. I'm really liking the new setup. We put a lot into it. Hopefully, throughout the year, we keep working on it. It gets a little bit better, but I'm really. So, as always, we have several different topics we talk about throughout the show. We're starting off with Jake Paul. There's been a lot of controversy. Does Jake Paul deserve a... What do you think?
So, Kruk, looking at Jake Paul's past fights, he first he played. You never know. You never know with people. Maybe he has something left in him, but I guess time will tell, right, Kruk?
I'm a fan of nicknames, right? And Jake Paul got the nickname the Problem Child. And if you look at just about everything he's done, that nickname's pretty accurate. I mean, everything he does, people discredit him. People say, oh, that's terrible. You shouldn't have done it. And now people are saying one of two things when it comes to his boxing career. A, he can't last long enough in the ring to, be a professional boxer. And to that, I say, look at these people like, Muhammad Ali, for example. He's got the second most first-round knockouts in boxing history, second to only Mike Tyson. And, the two of those are absolute huge names who got the job done early on in the fight. And now other people say, okay, he can knock him out early, but he can't win the long game. Some of the best boxers ever at the long game are, Floyd Money Mayweather, who just, throws a few good punches in, wins the cards, and then ends up winning it without really hurting himself. That's smart, but you look at the last fight Jake Paul had, he won.
Decision. So he can win off the cards. He can win by a TKO. And
I personally don't see why people are still mad about it because, he's got 4 wins, 3 KOs. He had an amateur fight. He knocked the guy out in the 5th round. I think that he is a legit boxer for the boxing matches in which he includes himself in.
Yeah, but also when I look at this, I also think the thing about boxing and everything else, it's a very mental kind of thing. And when you look at it, how long, like when you mentioned the long game, how long do you believe, this is a question, do you think Jake Paul can last if he kept going in the ring? How many rounds do you believe?
We're definitely not in the era where, it's Rocky Balboa out there going 15 rounds, yelling, "No, Adrian." That's not happening anymore. The longest they can go is 12 rounds, and I don't think he honestly has the endurance to go 12 rounds because that is a long time. You're getting body shots, you're getting head shots, and you have less than a minute in your corner to get glued up, stitched up, iced. So the question I have for you, does Jake Paul deserve a...
I think to an extent he deserves a real fight. And I say to an extent because, like we kind of mentioned, like you just mentioned before, I kind of want to see what he does when it's a lot of more rounds, say it's 6 or 7 rounds, it goes to a 12th round. Can he last that long? And I believe that's to an extent fight I want to see him go. Because the fights that we've seen him do this way, they're easy, they're okay stars. They're okay people over time. But I still am not totally sold that he's that kind of boxer yet, or he's that kind of person. Now, yes, he actually just played a person that was pretty well known with Tyron Woodley. I mean, he's a pretty well known name. He was a big UFC welterweight champion, back in the day. So that's someone that's a big name this way. Not his. It's just going to depend on what he can do over time, and that's what I believe in, Kirk.
I am the exact opposite. I don't think he deserves a legit fight because the fights that he's taking, Nate Robinson, 2 YouTubers, an MMA guy who's been out of the business for a little bit of time. Like, these guys are not boxers, but he's making hand over fist money off of pay-per-view. And some of these fights, he's not even the main card. Like, these fights, other people are fighting after him, but he's still making tons of money because he's bringing it in. Like, yeah, okay, they're not real fighters, but honestly, can you name more than 2 real fighters? Like, there's Floyd Mayweather and then there's Tyson Fury. There's that guy who always fights Tyson Fury, and I can't even think of his name. Like, those 2 are connected kind of like, Rocky Balboa and Apollo Creed when it comes to boxing, and I can't even think of the guy's name. But, I mean, the dude's getting opponents who are at his same skill level, and he's beating them. Why ruin a good thing here? Like, they're making money. Yeah. He's winning the fights. Don't try to be a...
That's a little also strategic too. And it's strategic because he knows what his talent is. He knows what's best for him. But it's just interesting because he feels like he's so into this now. Now I feel like he's making money for it. He wants to do something this way for himself. I think that could be important for him. And possibly if he wants to keep going on with this, he needs to get a real fight soon. So obviously we'll see. Time will tell, Kruk, what will happen with Jake Paul. Moving on, though, we're going to talk about the NFL cuts that happened over this past weekend. NFL teams and organizations had each of their player cuts for each organization. Obviously, NFL teams can only allow 53 players on their active roster, with only about 46 of the players can dress for the actual games. One of the names that we're going to talk about is New England quarterback Cam Newton, who actually got cut over this past week from the New England Patriots. Last season, Newton threw for 2,657 yards with 8 touchdowns and 10 interceptions. So, Kruk, hearing that big name we just mentioned with Cam Newton, first of all, I'm going to ask you 2 questions. First question is, what do you think first of the Cam Newton? Should he have not been released? Should he have been cut? And also, what are some other names that you feel like, they should not have been cut or left from the team?
Cam Newton is definitely a top 32 quarterback in the league, meaning that he should start somewhere, but not in New England. He had his season in New England. It didn't work out for him. That is very obvious looking at last year's results. But I like the move for the Patriots. I like the Patriots stepping away because, everybody knows when you have a long relationship, you need a rebound to get back. And Cam Newton was basically the rebound from Tom Brady. And what's better than, a white quarterback who's not the most athletic, bringing in another white quarterback who's not the most athletic from Alabama. So he knows what a winning program is. He knows how to rally troops because at the quarterback position, you have to be a leader. You cannot, just be a normal player if you're a quarterback. You have to be a leader. And I think that Mac Jones needs to be able to prove himself with the organization because Robert Kraft is the kind of guy where if you're not proving that you are the best, then you're not going to play here. He wants the best. He is as demanding of an owner as Jerry Jones is without being as an elaborate owner as Jerry Jones is. But I do think Cam Newton should play somewhere. I just don't think New England is the spot.
Yeah, I kind of agree with what you're saying. And with Cam Newton, it's just, I feel like he's declined for a while. I mean, last time we saw Cam Newton with his stats overall was back in 2015 with that Super Bowl with the Carolina Panthers. He had all those stats, he had all the organization, but he hasn't lived up to the hype since. And you've seen it just with the numbers I just mentioned there. It's not like, and also it didn't look like Cam was totally in with New England. And when I say that it's like the whole, like when he was throwing passes, he didn't have like the spiral that he used to have. He didn't have like the running ability that he thought he used to have. It didn't seem like total him. And it feels like that New England, when you're following a guy like Tom Brady, that's a lot of pressure, obviously, off your heels. I mean, Tom Brady, to me, I'll say this is still one of the best quarterbacks of all time. I still believe that 100% with just his whole overall body of work and how he is as a professional. But now it's where do New England feel is best for them? And Mac Jones is an interesting person. With Alabama, he had great stats, had great receivers with Devontae Smith, and overall everyone else on that organization. But can Mac Jones make that total transition? And I feel like with Mac Jones, his thing is he kind of runs a little bit better than Tom Brady. Because I watched him a little bit, he kind of can run. He almost reminds me a little bit of Joe Burrow of my Cincinnati Bengals. He kind of runs not bad, but he runs okay. So that's the thing about Mac Jones. Obviously, I think the talent overall, I think Mac Jones is going to have to prove that 100%, especially in the division that they're in, right? With Miami, with possibly Tua, or who knows, with Deshaun Watson, possible rumors. You never know that possibly with Miami. So we'll see. I mean, especially with Cam Newton. Do you have anybody else?
Yeah.
Yeah, I got two other players that I want to talk about. One being cut and then one actually not being cut. Desmond Dufant was cut from the Chicago Bears. He missed 18 days of training camp to attend his father's funeral and then mourn him afterwards. It's really kind of a salty move by the Bears. I mean, this guy just lost his dad and you're just going to cut him from the team. That's a salty move. But then again, when you looked at it, he missed 6 consecutive days for the funeral and all that preparation in the morning and whatnot. And then he missed 12 days at the end of camp. And he said, that was for my father's funeral as well. So, I mean, it was a month and a half difference between the actual funeral and then when he missed the 12 days later. So unless they dug him up and then reburied him, I honestly don't know why you would miss 12 days later. Now, I personally, I haven't lost my dad, so I don't know what's going on in his head. But looking at his abilities on the field, regardless of what happened off the field and missing practice, he was not the cornerback who could replace Kyle Fuller. Kyle Fuller was a defensive staple for the Chicago Bears, almost as good as Khalil Mack. But he was a defensive staple, and he is no longer with the Bears. The Bears need to try to fill that spot, and this guy was not the guy to do it. The other guy is Samias Reyes, who most people don't know about him. He's with the Washington football team. His experience in football prior to training camp was a total of 17 days. He trained for 1 week in high school football. That's when he quit high school football to pursue his career in basketball. From 2014 to 2018, he played for 4 different colleges trying to make it into the league. When he didn't make it into the league, he spent 10 days training at IMG Academy, getting ready for football, and he just inked a deal with the Washington football team. And I mean, that's just natural ability right there. Like, this guy came out of nowhere. Basketball wasn't working for him, so he had to switch it up. Evidently, he's a natural football player because he's in the NFL.
Wow, interesting story there, Kruk. I did not know anything about that. But my names might be a little bit more my people have heard of than what that name was. One of them is from the Cleveland Browns and Kareem Hunt. One of the people that I was this way is they were kind of looking at Nick Chubb, but also with Kareem Hunt, he was kind of injured a lot during the process. But the thing about Kareem Hunt is this guy is a great player. This guy came out of this, used to play with the Chiefs, and he came over to the Browns, and he had a lot of running touchdowns, a lot of plays for this organization. But obviously, the whole main problem of it is that the contract didn't work out for him as much as what they'd like to. So they just kind of didn't feel like it was the best. So unfortunately, they had to cut him, move on. And then my next other person is Devin Funches. He used to play at the University of Michigan. Now, this guy used to be on the same team as Cam Newton back in 2015 when they won the Super Bowl. And he had a lot of stats. In this game, the Super Bowl, he had 31 receptions for 473 yards. Actually, check, that's the total amount of yards that he had. Check, 31 receptions at a Super Bowl game. That'll be a lot of yards, right, for receptions. But anyways, though, obviously with his situation, there was a lot of injuries too. Since the 2015, he's been on injury reserve. And they just didn't feel his best. So they released him off of injury reserve, the injury settlement for the organization. So obviously we hope he gets healthy. And obviously he makes a good team. That guy's talented. I remember he played against Ohio State made a lot of plays. So we'll see if he can do the same more in the next team he goes to. So
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And moving forward, college football has just started. We got week 1 underway. What are some key matchups that have already happened that you would like to discuss?
let's talk about the Ohio State University. And we're going to talk about the game they had last night, Thursday night, against Minnesota. The score ended up being 45-31. In the stats, C.J. Stroud, new true freshman quarterback C.J. Stroud, threw for 294 yards. He had 4 touchdowns, and he also had 1 interception. Now, obviously, the defense was a main problem throughout the game. Sometimes the safeties and corners, they got beat pretty hard. It was a post or slant play, and sometimes couldn't stop. Sometimes it gave me a couple headaches, and it made me, want to hopefully get through that whole process. So that was one of the main games I saw last night, Krug. You got any other matchups you want to look at?
Absolutely. I got this handy-dandy whiteboard we found.
Boise State and UCF. Boise State was killing them the entire game, right? Out of nowhere, UCF comes back and wins it. College football, mayhem happens. Nebraska versus the University of Illinois, Fighting Illini. As a guy born and raised in Illinois, I was told not to cheer for them. And then they come out here and beat the Big Red team by 8 points. We got Buffalo and Wagner.
Wow.
I mean, was that even a game after the first quarter? Wagner scored in the fourth quarter, so they were obviously playing against the JV freshman team. You mentioned Ohio State, Minnesota, 45-31. We got some, Big Ten action happening. And then some other stuff right here coming up. Penn State versus Wisconsin. That's going to be a good game. Number 19 taking on number 12. Alabama's obviously ranked number 1. Why not, right? Taking on Miami, Florida. Not Miami, Ohio. I know.
Yeah.
I know it's a pretty popular city in Ohio.
Confused, right? Can't get that confused.
Number 5, Georgia taking on number 3, Clemson. So we got some huge games still coming up. But these games were fun to watch. Even this one, it was a blowout. But hey, it's basically like playing a game of Madden, except you get to hold your beer instead of the controller, right?
Yeah, just looked like Wagner had a tough night in the office. So to those matchups there, Krug, the Penn State, Wisconsin, Miami, and Alabama. I think the main matchup to watch in this one is obviously Georgia versus Clemson. That's going to be held in Charlotte, North Carolina. That's a big game. I'll give you some kind of info, what we're looking for. Obviously, Georgia's going to have JT Daniels as their quarterback. He was there last year, and he wasn't a bad quarterback, but a lot of people think he's got to step up. And obviously, whenever we think of Georgia, at least when I think of Georgia, I think of the running game of Georgia. I always think of the past running backs they had, Nick Chubb, Sony Michel. But are they going to have that same kind of running back this year? I don't know. We'll see. Because if you know Georgia, they always find some way to have good running backs. Now, getting to Clemson, the other guy to look for is DJ Ugalele. I think I said that right? DJ Ugalele. That guy one game he played against Notre Dame. He had a lot of stats. He threw it over the yard. But also, here's the thing about that game is that I don't totally believe in Notre Dame's defense that much. I didn't think it was that great. So it's a new challenge. Playing a Georgia team, new whole era, a lot of weapons lost too. They lost ETN. They obviously lost the main person, Trevor Lawrence, the number 1 pick going to the Jacksonville Jaguars. So that game's going to be very interesting to see, especially for Clemson. If you look at this crowd, Clemson after this game, who are they going to have in the rest of their schedule? That's the thing. Their schedule in the ACC is unfortunately not that great. And that's the thing about Clemson is they need to win this game and convincingly. Because the only other ranked opponent I see them possibly going against is North Carolina. And that's a problem. With Georgia, the thing is they got the SEC. You're in the SEC, you got Florida in your division, you possibly sometimes can play Alabama. I don't know their total schedule, I have to look it up. But still, that is some of the main things they have being in the SEC. So that's what I would have to say about the main matchup this way. You got anything else?
I mean,
absolutely. You really think about the NFL draft is where you see the best of the best in terms of college football players moving forward. And there are ebbs and flows in certain years. If you want a quarterback, last year was your chance to draft one, 5 of them going in the first round. This year, it's still early, so these players will change, but the top 10 prospects for the 2022 draft, 5 of them are linemen. And I believe that 2 of them are offensive linemen. So being a lineman myself, I'd love to see that. You know, obviously, number 1 right now is the DN from Oregon. I'm going to butcher his name. I'm going to go for it anyways. Kayvon Thibodeau.
Yep.
I mean, absolute animal on the field. He is an offensive tackle's nightmare. You got the offensive tackle for Alabama, Evan Neal, who is, I mean, an absolute monster. I thought he might have gone last year's draft, but sticking around for another year, being safe about it. The offensive tackle for Washington, Jackson Kirkland. I mean, that guy's just great. And then rounding it out, number 9 is Kenyon Green, an O-lineman for Texas A&M. Or excuse me, and then another Texas A&M player, a D-lineman, Jamarvin Leal. So Texas A&M, a team that really doesn't get talked about all that much in a positive way. They've got 2 top 10 linemen.
Yeah, but we'll see what happens when they play Alabama. That's all I say for Texas A&M organization. Now, we're going to go now to baseball to introduce one of our favorite athletes here on campus. This person is a starting pitcher for our
That's the first
season
guest
3 and
on
the new
season
side.
3 and the new side. So you got
big shoes to
got
fill.
big shoes to fill.
How do you like this?
So we understand that you actually used to play football.
You actually used to play football.
I did.
You played football, and we heard you were pretty good at it.
We heard you were pretty good at it.
Letters coming in from Alabama.
Letters coming in from Alabama.
Yeah, I had to gratefully decline from those offers to pursue a career.
Well, I mean, it does
So,
happen.
it does
we brought you in
we brought you in to talk about the
NL
wild card race
in specifically. So kind of break that down. How is that looking?
How is that
in your
looking in
So
your eyes?
right now, there was a total of 6.
There was a total of
Now there's
6.
a total of 7.
Now there's a total of 7.
So the top 2 teams right
So
now.
the top
in
2
the
teams right now in the NL
West, I believe.
West,
We have the Dodgers and the
We have the Dodgers and
Giants.
the
Both with the same record.
both the same record.
And then through there we have Cincinnati, Padres, now the Phillies, and the Mets. Now looking at those teams, I picture that the Dodgers will have the NLDS spot. The wild card will be between the Cincinnati Reds and the Giants. Now looking at both teams, looking at how many pitchers they'll have ready, and looking at Cincinnati and that perspective, who would they throw against the Giants? Ultimately, it would be Sonny Gray, in my perspective. Giants, not very sure who would they throw. But with how well Sonny Gray has done this year, it would be a smart decision to say that the Reds would make it against the Dodgers and the LDS. But we all know how powerless the Giants are right now. So my guess right now is going to be Giants versus Dodgers and NLDS. And with that wild card being set up, there are multiple. Let's just say the season ends today. Season completely ended today. The only 2 teams for the wild card will be Giants and the Reds. But there is a tiebreaker between the Dodgers and the Giants, so that hypothetically would not work out because that would create a whole bunch of mess for a playoff game. Other than that, right now you have the Phillies. Phillies are on hot streak. They're going to be on hot streak. You look at their schedule. They don't have the hardest schedule. It's fairly easy in my perspective. And if they continue to keep on winning, and later down the road, they lose 5-6 games in September, they're in that shot for the wild card game. They're in the chance to make it into the NLDS against the Dodgers. In my perspective, Dodgers. There's no other.
So Keaton, I see you talked about the NL. So I'm not looking at the AL. The AL wild card. Look at both the Yankees and the Red Sox. Both those teams, both history. Looking at both overall, look like possibly could be those. Right now the Rays are leading it at the moment. So I look at those 2 teams. I know they play each other. If you had to choose between the Yankees or the Red Sox, the Wrestling and postseason, which one would you choose? And why?
Very good question.
Very good
I
question.
hate both teams with
I hate both teams
passion,
with a burning passion.
but if I had to guess,
I
I would go with.
would go with.
Sadly, I have to say.
I would go with the
with their
Yankees.
history,
With their
with
history.
everything they have.
With
They were on
everything
a
they have.
13-game winning streak.
Game winning streak. Unfortunately got
They brought
snapped.
in
They brought in two power hitters,
Rizzo and Joey Gallo,
Gallo.
that helped their batting.
helped their
but their
batting.
biggest downfall right now.
Biggest downfall right now is
All
pitching.
they have.
All
is
they
Garrett
have
Cole.
is Garrett.
That's all they got at the moment.
That's all they got.
No other else. You don't hear
No
any
other
other
else.
name.
You don't hear any other name.
All they have is Garrett Cole.
All
and
they
he
have
can't
is Garrett
pitch.
Cole, and he can't pitch it.
But with the Red Sox,
But with the Red Sox, you
JD
have
Martinez.
JD
You
Martinez.
have Chris Sale.
You have Chris Sale who's now pitch.
You have an assortment
You have
of
an
guys.
assortment of guys in the bullpen for the Red
And
Sox.
that you
And
could
that-
throw a
you
bullpen
could throw a
team
bullpen
against the
team
Yankees and
against the Yankees and
still
still
with what they have.
with what they have.
So right there, I am
right
sad
there,
to say
I'm
this.
sad
I'm
to
still
say
picking
this.
the
I'm
Yankees
still picking
because
the Yankees.
I just cannot stand Red Sox.
Red Sox.
Can't take them anymore.
Can't take
Just one more question. I mean,
Just
also,
one more question.
I'm glad the MLB did.
I'm glad the MLB
did.
did.
Field of Dreams game. Field they have also between apparently your dreaded Yankees and the White Sox, and I thought that was very cool that they had that in Iowa. It was a very good event. I think it really got baseball back on the map. So yeah, I'm just curious, what do you think they should keep doing games like that more in the MLB? And why so?
Well, going back to
started
it all for the
started
Field
it
of
all
Dreams,
for the Field of Dreams.
that set the tone.
That set the
for
tone for
fans of baseball.
fans of
Almost
baseball.
everyone who loves
Almost
baseball
everyone
has
who
seen
loves baseball has seen
and loves
Field of
them.
Dreams
And
and
like
loves them.
quote that.
Like quote that.
So might as well continue
might as well
having Field of
continue
Dreams
having
games
Field of Dreams
and
games
continue bringing the throwback
continue
jerseys.
the
As we all
throwback
saw
jerseys.
Yankees
We all saw Yankees
I don't
wore.
remember what year
I
their
don't remember what year
uniforms
their
were. They had the dark,
They had
dark gray,
dark gray,
light blue. And then you saw the White Sox.
and then you saw the
Their
White
uniforms.
Sox. And their
Those are what attracted
what attracted
throwback
the
jerseys.
throwback
The top
jerseys,
players
the
playing each
top
other
players playing
in a
each other
small
in a
area,
small
small
area,
capacity
small
area,
capacity
under the
area,
lights,
under
and
the
you just
lights,
see the
and you
field of
just
corn
see the field of
all
corn
behind us,
all
stadium
behind
and
us,
around the
stadium and around.
I
the
just
house.
think that's the most
I just
beautiful
think
thing
that's
to
the
say.
most
I mean, that's just, I've always, whenever I watch that movie, it gives me chills after watching it again because it's just it's a very cool movie, and just overall, I think with baseball, especially with the regular season. I'm not saying baseball overall is not a bad thing, but the regular season, sometimes people tune out sometimes and they don't get too much into baseball. It's other things that go on. And I think it's very cool to have that just with a game like that. So then people can just, especially on prime time. It was like, what, on Fox, I believe, correct?
Oh yeah,
Yeah, it was on
absolutely.
Fox. Yeah, it was on Fox. And it was just very cool to see that for baseball. And I hope they keep doing it, especially bringing back the throwback jerseys, especially for a lot of teams. I think that's just, it makes it different. You know what I mean? It makes the league keep going in sports.
So yeah, I got a couple of questions for you. You said there were 17. Currently in the spot looking for one of those two wild card games. How late into September do you think we're going to go until we really see a separation from the majority of those? Because all seven can't be hanging that close coming down the line.
Good question. I don't see it happening that late. I see it happening soon. We're gonna see teams that baseball's a game of failure. You're not gonna win every game. You can't predict. You don't know how. Let's just say tonight Giants play the Dodgers. David Price on the mound. He has done well in recent years, but he may not do well tonight, and that could cost them an assortment amount of problems, which is unlikely, but hypothetically speaking, with baseball being a game of failure, you don't know what's going to happen. You never know what is going to happen the next day or the next game. Because at one moment, one team's up by 5 runs, and guess what? The next moment, the other team's up tied 5 runs. And it keeps going and going. It's just baseball is the craziest game to learn and understand because it changes so quickly. It's a fast-paced game. Sometimes it is very fast-paced. Deep dive into it. So, in my opinion, if we're talking about the separations from teams, the San Diego Padres, right on paper, will miss the playoffs. I don't see them making the playoffs. They have had so many problems. I mean, just looking at the sheet right now, in the last 10 games, they're 4-6. That's not very good. And the run differential between them and the Reds is +16. And that's still not good. They're allowing a lot of runs while scoring very little. So what does that tell me? Their pitchers are giving up a lot of hits, a lot of home runs, and a lot of walks.
It's just weird, and that's just interesting to see with Padres, right? Padres, they were a good team. They got a lot of bats, right? They got everything. Everyone was talking about the Padres at the beginning of the year. They were competing what? With the Giants. I mean, here's the thing: is I got a question with the Giants. I mean, first of all, we think of the Giants. Giants last year, what they were? I don't even think they were good last year. I believe they were not. They were not even to the caliber level. And all of a sudden, now they're just the same area as the Dodgers, which obviously the Dodgers have had the past couple of years. Have done so well. So I guess, what is your thought about the team of the Giants? Do you think they possibly could be a World Series team?
Yes and no.
Yes and no.
Yes, because something clicked before the season began. I guarantee you they probably came as a team together, talked about the roles, and then through with each other, through practice and dugout talks, all. I say no because the Giants don't have any sort of to get them deep into the playoff. And I just don't see. I just can't see the Giants making a pass that they make it to the end of this.
So then, shifting gears from the wild card just to the hottest teams in baseball right now. The Phillies are on a 6-game winning streak, and as you mentioned, the schedule coming up looks pretty easy. They have 3 games set against the Marlins, 3 games against the Cubs, 4 games against the Rockies, 4 against the Pirates, and then 3 against Baltimore. The 5 teams I just listed there are definitely not cream of the crop teams.
Do you think they could make a push and almost or possibly steal that spot from the Reds?
Oh, absolutely. The Reds keep declining. The recent season that they're having right now. But if the Reds keep playing the way they're playing, I do not see the Reds making a lot of spots. I could see the Phillies make that spot. But the Phillies, like I said earlier, baseball's a game of failure. You never know what's going to happen. Phillies need to make a jump. And with the teams they have lined up, it needs to change.
Well, I guess to add on, I think the problem with the Reds is just by watching. Here's the thing: I don't watch baseball. I don't watch the Reds total regular season. I don't know what they do all the time. But when I do look at the box score or whatever on ESPN, I see them lose 2 games to the Marlins or whatever. That makes, you know what I mean? That's the problem. The Marlins are what? They're like 20 games below 500. So that's a problem. You're right. I mean, the thing is, you can't lose to inferior opponents, right? You can't lose to teams like, I think I saw they also play a couple of series with the Pirates, it looks like. And I think they also keep playing with the Nationals, which obviously it's not been their year. They've lost a lot of people. So it's got to be, it's basically what you said. It's just, what's the mindset going into the postseason? I think it's a main important part is that you got to have a good mindset. You can't just take, any game is a game, right? Any game is an important game in any sport. That's why I totally say. So, I mean, you say the Phillies and the Reds, but I think it'll be interesting to see what the whole wild card will be. If you had to ask me really quick, if you would ask that question for me, I hope it looks like it's probably either going to be most likely the Giants, I believe, like you mentioned earlier. And to me also, probably it'll be the Reds. Because I think the Reds are going to find something just with their bats. And I think that's the problem with the Reds. They scored about, past 4 games or so, they scored about only 2 or 3 runs, which is a problem in any game. You got to score more runs than that to compete. So we'll see what happens. Basically, MLB, any sport, anything can happen. So, you got any other questions, Crook?
Absolutely, you mentioned it. Talking about the Reds and the Marlins, not wanting to lose those games. Absolutely right. There's an old adage in sports, not just baseball, all sports. You got to win the games. You're supposed
to win, and then go 500 in the games you're not. So, other teams that I was looking at, I personally don't like the Yankees or the Red Sox either. And I'm trying to find the best situation for somebody to knock them down. And 2 of the closest teams are the Oakland A's, the Seattle Mariners, and then just throwing them in there, the Cleveland Indians, soon to be the Cleveland Guardians. Those 3 teams, I'm trying to find a way in their schedule that they can win, but the Seattle Mariners probably have the best chance, but let's be honest, the Seattle Mariners are not a team that you want to put your eggs in that basket. And then looking at Cleveland, I mean, they could try to make a shot for it. They're hot right now, but the road ahead's super tough. They got 3 games against the Red Sox, 3 games against my Milwaukee Brewers, They got 5 games against the Red Sox. And then, they finish off with 7 games against the Royals and 7 games against the Twins. And that's all jumbled up in September. So, I could see them going 500 in September, but that's not going to be good enough to knock down a Yankee or a Red Sox.
There would have to be a decline
September
this month of September.
between either of them.
Between
Yankees,
either
Red
of them.
Sox.
Yankees, Red Sox.
Yankees back in the beginning of the season.
Back in the beginning of the season.
Yankees
You guys
were
remember.
terrible.
Terrible.
They could not hit the ball at all.
Could
Could not get on base.
Could not get
Pitching
on base.
was all
Pitching
right,
was all right.
but if that
But
shifts
if
back
that
into it,
shifts back into it in September,
we could possibly see some changes.
some changes.
I
which
personally doubt.
I personally doubt that.
I agree with what you're saying.
I agree with what you're saying.
The Yankees, the thing is, what carries the Yankees. The Yankees, if it's not without Giancarlo Stanton and Aaron Judge, I think their team it's just totally different. They're just not the Yankees that we obviously expect for over a couple of years. So we're going to transition real quick. Keaton, we'll keep you on for this. We were talking about just COVID overall in sports and like how COVID has affected sports overall. And I just want to know your thoughts about how do you, like, especially you being as an athlete, how has COVID affected you personally? How do you think it's affected the sports landscape?
Well, I'll go back to
COVID.
My season was cut short due to COVID, and I was in college sophomore with no offers whatsoever. And once it hit, I didn't know if I was going to go back to my or wherever I was going. There was a point in time where it was because you didn't know what you were going to do. And there were times where I was emailing and calling, emailing again, coaches, responses, because they're more worried about their returners more money to come back to their school. And that's why you see a lot of freshmen don't look like on sports, because you have seniors who are now 6 years because of COVID, getting their position back in their scholarship. So it's a struggle, but now since COVID went from stopping all sports, online classes, to now we're back in classes. We get to where we have to wear masks, and now we don't have to wear masks. At least here, correct. But from a sports aspect of it, in my 2 years I've been here, I have not seen any problems with COVID at all. I don't see any problem with it in the future because everybody follows the protocols, all that type of stuff. Some guys are vaccinated, some are not. And that's okay. It's their personal belief. It's what they choose and what they want to do. And right now, I just feel like COVID is starting to be pushed away. Fans are coming back in. Tons of fans. And it's making everything somewhat come back to normal.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it's good that we're having people. I think that's a very important part. Is people just hopefully can get vaccinated and can hopefully stop this, right? And overall, and just with, me and Kruk and both attested this with football. Our season was long, and it was a long season. We obviously had to play, I believe, 5 or 6 games in the fall or something like that, and we had to play 4 games in the spring, and that was a lot of work. It was a lot of work, and we still came out of it as obviously having a ring as well. So we got obviously co-champions with that. So me and Kruk are obviously very proud of that. But we also know that ring, or whatever I believe, that ring took a lot more work than usually with a 5 or 4 month season, which I think that's very good to think about and very interesting to think about overall. And just, I'm glad that, watching, as you probably have known from what I've talked about, I'm a big Ohio State fan, and just watching from last night or Thursday night, watching the Minnesota game, seeing all those fans back, it was packed. You could see no one around there. It just brings back, joy, like I said. It brings more, I think to me, fans help the sport. I don't know what you guys believe, but I think like anytime fans are at a game, it helps any athlete out, whether it's any sport, because that's what makes the game the game. That's why we enjoy it so much. So I'm hoping we can keep getting better with it. Hopefully we can decrease it. People can get vaccinated and just help themselves overall. Like you mentioned, it's their personal beliefs, what if they want to or not get vaccinated. But in my opinion, just get vaccinated, help yourself out, and hopefully stop the disease.
Yeah, and before quarantine and COVID really hit, people would talk about home field advantage, and when you'd hear that term, you would mostly think of
maybe the refs, they pay off the refs or whatever. Once the fans were gone, you really realized what home field advantage really meant. Yeah. Because when you would play in, the Seattle Seahawks at home, yeah, that's a very, popular team when the sound, like you cannot hear your quarterback saying set go and he's 5 yards away from you. Even the Kansas City Chiefs are one of the loudest stadiums in all of sports, and you can't hear anything there. When there were no fans there was no problem for the players to hear each other. There was no home field advantage really because the NFL has paid their own refs. So there are no home field advantages without fans. Now that they're bringing fans back into the stadium, these teams are really starting to understand, okay, this is going to be harder than we thought it was because, back when we're used to having fans, we're used to that noise being there. You guys just went on an 18 hiatus of basically no fans. Pretty much running a scrimmage, if you would, more or less, with no fans, just the refs. And now you're bringing fans back into it. It's going to be a lot harder than people think. And then another thing with COVID, if you've been watching the ESPN updates, they will literally show certain coaches being like, yes, we cut this player because he refused to get vaccinated. Jimmy Graham, the tight end for the Chicago Bears, would have been the 54th person on the depth chart if he wouldn't have proven himself during camp even more than he did, because he was close to being cut because he refused to get the vaccination. When there was an outbreak with the Bears, they thought that he was with the team. He proved that he wasn't, but, basically they wanted to put him in quarantine for 2 weeks of camp and then more or less can him because he didn't get the shot and he wasn't going to be readily available. Kirk Cousins was in the same situation. The entire quarterback staff got quarantined because one of them ended up catching COVID. And, the team was trying to come up with ways to prevent another quarantine for all of the quarterbacks. One of the ways was outdoor meetings. And I don't know if you guys are as, cold as I am when it becomes winter, but having outdoor meetings in Minnesota during the winter might be one of the dumber things I've ever heard of. But, yeah, COVID's here. It's most definitely real. But at the end of the day, if you want to get the shot, that's your opinion. That's your personal prejudice.
Well, but also mentioned, it also tells the importance of it too, because also it's important to know that, especially if you want to make, especially what you just said with Jimmy Graham, possible getting a spot. And we know, as I know Jimmy Graham, he's a great tight end. He's a great athlete overall. And just the fact that he didn't get that shows you that, well, it's his choice, but you got to know anytime you have choice, there's always consequences of what happens. So that's what I always will say when somebody does a situation or an idea like that. Now, overall, same thing. I also heard about Jacksonville with the Jaguars. They did something also too that Urban Meyer always took into consideration when he did ideas about cutting players if they didn't get vaccine or not. He said he always had that in his mind to see if anyone didn't have it, it could possibly be a factor of being cut or anything. So it's basically you just got to take this thing seriously, and we got to take it seriously, and we hopefully can get to the stop of it. So
Absolutely. From all of us here at Krunch Time with Kruk, I'm Kruk. That's Dash, and that's Keaton Ashby. We'll see you next week. Stay classy.